Okay, folks, so welcome to part two. So now we're going to carry on looking at the Democratic Leadership Council, these moderates in the centre. Now, two characters you might recognise is Obama and Joe Biden. Obama said that he told the the New Democrat coalition that he was a new Democrat. He was a pro-growth Democrat, whatever that means. Joe Biden as well, you might say, comes to this group as well. What we will do is in a future lesson look at some policies of Obama. I need to change and put some of Biden's things in as well, and we can hopefully see some things there. Okay, so I had a phone call then. Right, so to have an example of someone from this group is this lady. This is Senator Diane Feinstein of California. She's often seen as being in the middle of the Democrat Party. She's not actually a member of any caucus in particular, any grouping in the Democrats, but she's seen as being in the centre. Now, she used to be in favour of the death penalty, but she's now changed her mind. She supports Obamacare, but then she's opposed further expansion of Obamacare. She kind of believes Obamacare is about right, it's got it about in the centre. She's very pro-environment. She does support gun restrictions. She is very pro-Israel. She supported the pressure group called AIPAC when they sent a letter to Obama telling him to veto any resolutions passed by Congress that were one-sided against Israel. She supports Obama, or she supported Obama when he sold $1.5 billion of weapons to Saudi Arabia. And she voted to extend the Patriot Act. This is this law passed by George W. Bush, which enhanced the security services in America following 9/11, and she's been labelled by Edward Snowden as a traitor for her support of this. So you can see here, can't you, quite strong on national defence, very pro-Israel, quite strong on law and order, but also quite progressive on other issues like the environment, for example. Now, the third group of Democrats, these are the ones in the political centre of the whole American politics. They're on the right of the Democrat Party. Some people have called them virtual Republicans. They tend to be in the more conservative areas. So when the Democrats are doing well, they pick up seats in conservative districts, and they tend to have blue dogs. They describe themselves as being fiscally conservative, i.e., they don't like raising taxes. They want to be very careful about spending money, but also socially progressive. So, things like LGBT rights and things of that nature. Most of them are pro-choice, but not all of them. One or two of them don't believe in a woman's right to choose to have an abortion or not, but most of them tend to do. Most of them oppose further gun restrictions. Not all of them, but most of them do. Most of this group opposed Obamacare back in 2010 when it was passed. Most of them supported Bush's tax cuts when he made them. One or two of them have supported Trump's tax cuts as well. And they tend to be quite strong on national defence, and they tend to be quite hawkish on this issue as well. Now, the strength within the Democrat Party, they were decimated in the 2010 midterms. And this kind of makes sense because they represent the most conservative districts, those areas which sometimes vote Republican, sometimes vote Democrat. So obviously when the Democrat Party are doing well and they're gaining seats off Republicans, they're going to be gaining those seats in conservative districts. Because of the primary system, the chances are conservative districts will choose conservative Republicans or conservative Democrats. So whenever the party does well, the new dogs tend to gain seats, and whenever the Democrat Party does badly, the blue dogs are the seats that tend to lose. With that in mind, I suspect they'll probably gain quite a few blue dog Democrats in the elections this year, but then I imagine they'll probably lose them in the midterms 2 years later. Today, there's only 25 of them in the House. It is up from 6. So again, when the Democrats won those seats in 2018, they did gain some blue dogs, which you kind of would expect. One senator is a member of the group, who we'll come to in a few moments, although some clearly have blue dog beliefs, but not actually caucus with them. For example, Joe Manchin of West Virginia. Virginia is quite a conservative state, always votes Republican. There's a Republican senator, but the second senator is Joe Manchin, a Democrat. He's the guy we saw on a previous video where he did adverts where he's shooting a gun, clearly showing his kind of, gun credentials. Okay, these two characters are blue dogs in the current Congress. You've got Senator Samia of Arizona. Arizona quite a Republican state, but it is getting more purple. And Charlie Crist from Florida. So, talking about the senator first of all, when she was in the House of Representatives, she was one of the most conservative House members. She voted against Nancy Pelosi being the Speaker. In 2018, she was one of 3 Democrat senators to vote in favour of Trump's tax cuts. She voted with Republicans to vote against the Green New Deal in the Senate, saying it would cost too much money. She does support quite tough immigration measures. Again, she's representing Arizona, which, remember, does border onto Mexico. However, she does support gun restrictions. And she is supportive of gay rights. She herself is bisexual. So, again, she's quite typical, socially liberal, but then quite strong and quite conservative on things like law and order and many other issues. Okay, Charlie Crist of Florida, he's an interesting character. He used to be a Republican. In fact, he used to be the Republican governor of Florida. And then he switched to the Democrats in 2012, saying the Republican Party gone far too right-wing for him. So he was a moderate Republican who's now become a blue dog Democrat. He did support a constitutional amendment when he was a Republican to define marriage as between a man and a woman. He's now changed his mind on this. He was in favour, so he was against gun restrictions. Now he supports some gun restrictions. He did, though, one of the few members of the Democrats in Congress to vote in favour of Trump's wall. He does support the death penalty, and he's a bit unclear on abortion rights. He's kind of, we can read stuff on Wikipedia on what he's supported. One minute he seems to be a bit in favour of abortion rights, another time he's not. So he's a bit unclear on that particular issue. So again, he's a good example of a conservative Democrat, a blue dog Democrat. Okay, and the final thing is, of course, in the exam, this could be an area under the comparison section. And so I thought we were just thinking about some comparisons between the UK Labour Party and the Democrat Party in terms of factions. I did this before the general election last year, and one or two of them, I think, in hindsight, I might have to change very slightly. Anyway, there are some similarities between the two. Both parties have factions. That could be a paragraph. And the factions tend to be between the left and the right of their party. So within Labour, you've got Momentum on the left. You've also got Progress and New Labour kind of on the right of the party. In the US, the Democrats have got 3 factions. You've got your Progressive Left, your New Deal Democrats, and you've got the New Democrats and the Blue Dog Democrats. You could say that both parties have a membership which is perhaps a bit more radical than most of the elected politicians. So the fact the Progressive Left do really well, Bernie Sanders' 13 million votes, came a good second in the primaries this year, suggests that a lot of members of the Democrats are quite on that more radical Progressive Left end. And the same is true for Labour as well. All those new members Labour got under Momentum, for example, suggests that lots of Labour members are more radical. And again, for both parties, though, you could say, but there's perhaps been a bit of a pushback against that in recent times. The fact Biden, a more moderate, was chosen in the primaries to be their candidate. The fact Keir Starmer, again, more moderate than Jeremy Corbyn, has managed to win, obviously getting the votes of members to become the leader post-Corbyn. Momentum, yes, that's the example for that particular bullet point. And the Progressive Left and Momentum, you could say, have both used selection meetings to target elected politicians. There was some discussions, wasn't there, before the general election of 2019 about how Momentum were wanting to push out more moderate Labour MPs, people like Margaret Hodge, who criticised Jeremy Corbyn, and put in more Progressive Left people, or Momentum people, sorry. I don't think they got round to it because of when the election took place, but there were some seats where sitting members stood down and more Momentum type of people became Labour candidates in the election. The Progressive Left have used primaries to try and target certain moderates and put their own people in. I think Congresswoman Omar, for example, I think she took over a fairly moderate representative. There's also, I can't remember his name now, you can easily look it up and find out. I think it was in New York, there's quite a long-term moderate Democrat who was actually replaced by a far more progressive left person in the primaries. It's either in 2018 or 2016. You can easily find out who it was. In terms of differences, you could say Momentum and the Progressive Left have taken over the UK Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn being part of them, and that hasn't been the case with the Democrats, and they've always chosen moderates to be their presidential candidates. You can now say, and obviously that's no longer true because Jeremy Corbyn's gone, but you could say until recently Momentum had taken over the key positions of Labour. Division in the Labour Party had been less over policy, you might argue, and more over personalities. Because even most moderate Labour MPs tended to support the manifesto. Most of them were quite surprised, weren't they, by the 2017 manifesto, how most of them felt they could actually agree with large swathes of it. Whereas you could argue the Democrat divisions are much more over policy stances. Again, I'm just trying to think of three differences in case it came up, and it's a bit more tricky to think of three differences, to be honest with you. The third point you could make is that the structure of the US system encourages divisions within the parties. No, because the two parties are so big and so broad, because of the kind of loose nature of the primaries, and it leads to, there's less that kind of party control. There's been a history in the United States of caucuses within Congress, groups of members of Congress from both parties having particular views. There's a black caucus, for example, members of black politicians who tend to spearhead those issues. And in Britain, there's been much more control of party leadership towards their MPs and stuff like that. So there's been less of a culture in Britain of these very definitive kind of groupings within their parties. But as I put on here, this might be changing in Britain. When we look at the Republicans, we'll have a talk about the Conservatives, because they seem to be getting more into one of these caucus groups for that one. Okay, so I hope that's been useful and helpful, and I'll no doubt speak to you in the near future.